Second. Hello everyone, welcome to the latest in the webinar series that's been presented by the Emerging Technologies Group. Today we've got Sue Lacey-Bryant, who's our National Lead for the NHS Library and Knowledge Services, and she's going to be talking to us about the Topol review and very much about what are the main aspects of it, what does it mean for us as librarians, what can we do. The review's really wide-ranging, so Sue's going to break it down a bit into what practical things can we as library staff actually start to do now and what do we need to think for the future. So without more ado, I'm going to pass you over to Sue, who's going to deliver it.
Brilliant, thanks very much indeed. And thank you for taking the time to listen into this and learn more about the Topol review, which is, I believe, a really significant piece of work. As you're listening, I invite you to consider where you see the opportunities for our profession, the implications for our roles over time, and for the skills that you see that we need to develop now and moving into the future. You might want to have in mind, what does your service need to look like in 2029, and what will your role be like in 2029? So just to think about the objectives for this afternoon, if you'd like to move on, Catherine, please. What I'm hoping you're going to get out of this, the aim is that you will appreciate the scope of the review, the approach and the principles agreed, understand the structure of the final report and how it's put together. Really encourage you to read it. It's a very interesting and readable document, and it describes for you the top technologies expected to impact on healthcare, and by inference then on the healthcare workforce over the next 20 years. And then moving on, as we think about the implications for us, I'll look to take an overview of those recommendations particularly pertinent to information professionals, consider the implications for us, health librarians and knowledge specialists, and think about how we can advance this agenda in the context of knowledge for healthcare. So I'll move on, please, to look at the scope of the review. The review was set up to answer 3 questions. It was commissioned by Jeremy Hunt, Secretary of State for Health at the time, and he posed 3 specific questions. Actually, there are 4. Implicitly, there are 4 here. So the first question was, how are technological developments likely to change the roles and functions of clinical staff in all professions over the next 2 decades? Actually, that also presumes the answer to the question of which technological developments are going to make that difference and impact over those 20 years. What are the implications of these changes for the skills required? And what does that mean for the selection, curricula, education, training and development of the current and future NHS workforce? And there are some points to pull out as we stay even on these first slides. So 20 years chosen as a very definite time span because if you think about how long it takes to cook a doctor, how long it takes to cook a physiotherapist, an ophthalmologist, there is a lead-in time leading right back into school years. And so if you're thinking about this in educational terms, it's important to take the long-term view. So if we move on, thank you. So the review was led by Dr. Eric Topol, who is a remarkable man, a digital champion, really on the cutting edge of developments in this area, a practicing cardiologist in the States. And he worked by bringing together a panel of people, initially a board. He formed his board first and then went on to form some panels, which I'll talk about in a moment. But in forming this independent board, the board in the very early stages of this piece of work proposed 3 principles that would support the development of digital healthcare technologies throughout the NHS. So in terms of patients, seeing that shift away in responsibility from health professionals to patients as partners, seeing digital technologies implemented in a way that's respectful to patients, empowering those who want to be empowered, and providing them with appropriate support through e-health services, for instance. I'm going to come back to talk about evidence, central piece. I'll just go down to the gift of time. Really important concept underpinning this report, that wherever possible, the adoption of new technologies should enable healthcare staff to gain more time to care. The gift of time applies to patients too, and those of you who have experience either as patients or carers will be well aware of the amount of time it can take to book appointments, to get hold of repeat prescriptions. So saving the time, saving travel for patients is also at the heart of this. And of course, implementation of a digital record is undoubtedly central to being able to get those savings experience for both staff and patients, getting access to the right information at the right time and place. The piece around evidence, absolutely fundamental, and it was not coincidental that Eric Topol published an item in the Lancet at the same time as we launched the interim report of the Topol review in July 2008. The report says that the adoption of digital healthcare technologies should be grounded in compelling real-world evidence of clinical efficacy and cost effectiveness, followed by practical knowledge transfer throughout the NHS. There's a real flag there that we need to be looking both at the evidence base as we support healthcare professionals through the decision making and the implementation of new technology, but also that we perhaps need to think ourselves in more detail about how we can contribute in areas around knowledge transfer and the sharing and spreading of knowledge and innovation. The workforce needs expertise and guidance to evaluate technology applications and a fit-for-purpose legal and ethical governance framework that everyone can trust. And you don't need me to remind you of some high-profile stories which undermine trust in these areas. And clearly, the NHS needs to develop and use those tools and standards and guidance to evaluate technological applications to inform both commissioning and adoption. So the whole piece there around skills and using methodologies, and the whole piece to be adopted on the basis of compelling evidence, obviously takes us right back to looking at trial design and building a culture of knowledge sharing. If we could move on. So Dr. Topol was blown away by how centred the National Health Service is. I think that's a central point to make right the way through this document. He actually waived a fee for this piece of work. He believed it was groundbreaking and that the National Health Service, as a universal service available free at the point of care, would be the best positioned in the world to benefit patients from the technologies. And while we sliced and diced this in many ways at the outset, as we did the planning, Eric brought together panels around these. The first of all, the three technological areas: genomics, artificial intelligence and robotics, and digital medicine. The latter proved to be really quite wide-ranging. And quite early on in the work, probably 3 or 4 months in, as we talked with Eric, we were starting to sense and pull out that there were underlying cross-cutting threads which really spoke to organisational development, and we therefore a fourth, which was an OD working group looking at those areas. From our perspective, there are some key points to make. That this work benefited from support of information professionals and knowledge management right the way through. I was very fortunate to be invited to be the review programme manager. It was an extraordinary, exciting and demanding piece of work. I guess because of my input, I was able to ensure that from the outset we had support from the Library of Knowledge Service team at SASH, Surrey and Sussex Healthcare Trust, who moved very fast at the beginning to do the baseline literature searches for this work. Health Education England's own knowledge management team created the knowledge sharing, knowledge documentation, corporate sharing space for this, and as review program manager, I sat on the board in my own right. So we were able to bring these influences and demonstrate the importance of knowledge and knowledge management, and touch to those points about the evidence base right from the outset. And of course, those other cross-cutting OD type themes, you know, really come around data governance, health inequalities, thinking about widening digital participation, so broad issues right the way across. Each panel had representation from clinical fellows, educationalists, health economists, linked into program and project management, of course, members of our public advisory forum in Health Education England, as well as 2 co-chairs and a body of experts build up, including, of course, clinical leads around the work. So really interesting. And Eric himself spoke about this piece of work as the first time on the planet that such a body of expertise and diversity of professional roles had been brought together to think about what this meant of healthcare, what this means for the workforce and the education and development aspects. So really groundbreaking piece of work. Thank you, Catherine. So to cut to the quick, what did they come up with? Well, they came up with the top 10. This is a heat map, an arrow heat map. It's designed to reflect the perceived magnitude of impact on current models of care, and as I think I said earlier, by inference on the proportion of workforce affected. So as the shade moves through from a light grey through to a black, you're seeing the percentage, the proportion of the population, of the healthcare workforce population, that are likely to be working on care pathways or models of care and delivering treatment that draw on some of these new technologies. So if you look, telemedicine, you know, clearly with us as we're in 2020, expected to become, you know, omnipresent by 2040. Smartphone apps, again, you know, you'll have colleagues just around you today making use of all sorts of smartphone apps already, and again, going to become really, really prevalent within a matter of years. And I think we can see that happening around us. Sensors and wearables, that will have a huge impact. I mean, people are already using wearables and sensors, but when they really start to come through, the implications of being able to enable people to be cared for in their home or remotely, not needing to come into a hospital setting, will be hugely significant. So you can see this working right the way through. And if we talk about the genomic aspects of this, and there is a need for a genomic literacy move forward, as well as digital literacy, health literacy, information literacy from our perspective. As you think about that, you know, reading the genome is with us now. When we devised this, and we are only talking 1 year ago, it was thought that writing the genome would be coming in, you know, to be involved in maybe half of the pathways by 2040. It does seem to me to be moving quite fast. One of the things I'd encourage you to do after this presentation is maybe just for the next few days, this weekend, have a look at the broadsheets, have a look at the newspapers, obviously look on resources like Twitter. Once your antennae are up, I think this stuff is really, really all around us, and it is a fascinating range of subjects, and the implications are obviously huge. Thank you. So we sought to bring the report to life using a number of devices. This is an example, first of these. We took some practical use cases, things that are already in place but not evenly distributed. In fact, it's worth pausing there to say that when we took a view on the how we were going to tackle this 20-year period, we took a view that we would look at what was currently in use, and as I say, not evenly distributed, but things that were actually operational in the here and now. That was first 1 to 5, 1 to 7 years. We then look at what is really highly probable, what we could see coming in 5, 7 to 10 years' time. Obviously, the further out you go, your estimates, you move from the probable into the highly plausible. Nevertheless, the level of expertise in the room was so great, and so many of these people were at the cutting edge of this work that I think it's really worth looking at these recommendations, and certainly I'll be looking at them again in 5 and 10 years to see how accurate we think we were. So this particular example is one from the South Coast. It's around fracture clinics. The service is fondly known as Virtual Lucy, because Lucy is the name of the physiotherapist who first thought of this. And what she realised is that many people were coming in who really didn't need to come in to fracture clinic appointments, and people who really needed some quite expert care when they came in perhaps were not always seeing the right person first time. So the aim of this was to put in a telephone consultation and support some self-management, and make sure that people would see the right consultant for their injury when they came in, and that those who didn't need to come in didn't do that. And it was hugely successful. That is actually already spreading around the coast onto nearby health libraries, and you can see that there are huge time savings, a real clinical efficacy, and also some cost savings. So that's one of several use cases in the report. And we'll go on now, if we may, look at another thing that we did with some of that. So we were asked to share some numbers in the final report, and the numbers that Eric Topol chose to use were an indication of the time saving, of that gift of time. So there are a handful of these in the report. We had health economists on every panel. They were supported by researchers back in their academic base. We used only examples of use case studies for which there were accurate reports that are almost always in the public domain, or to which we had access. And then from that, we extrapolated savings in a very conservative way. So if something said, we've done a robust study on this, it shows that we can save 3 minutes for every patient engagement. We would say, okay, well, let's turn that into 1 minute, and then let's work that through and say, well, you're never going to get 100% of implementation. So let's work that through to 80%. So really modest, conservative approaches to scaling this up. And these figures are indeed remarkable. 7.6 million trauma and orthopedic outpatient appointments a year, 50% of those could be virtual. Whether your hospital is at a distance from you or quite close, but but there's heavy traffic between you and it, the saving for the patient is remarkable. The saving in terms of being able to see the right person and advance the care of those who really need to see a clinician, these quality implications are very significant. But this productivity piece of data obviously shows you the kind of time that is estimated to come back, so that health professionals have more time for clinical care. A point to raise here really is that we were asked to focus on clinicians. we extended that to talk about the clinical setting, and you will see, for instance, that one of the use case studies is around speech recognition, and that obviously impacts on a whole range of disciplines in the clinical setting. So we adopted that approach of the clinician in the clinical setting as we looked through the report. So we looked at the current, what that might mean if it's scaled up. We went on to look at future scenarios, if I might go on to the next slide. And here we were thinking about things which are under development, but are at a, at a trial stage. And this is an example of robotic colonoscopy. I mean, really exciting to see what is possible as we use technology to augment the work of staff. For example, primary care clinicians might be able to take forward these kinds of processes in the community without anaesthetic cover or support. So quite remarkable developments, and you will, as you start to look, you'll see more and more about the possible and how it's progressing. Thank you. When we're looking at those kinds of those kinds of scenarios, all the time what we're looking at as we went through the report is what does that mean for how roles and functions will change? What does it mean for education and training requirements? So if you think about that previous example, you're looking at colorectal cancer as being really common, those procedures being fundamental, colonoscopy being, really fundamental to how you're going to progress it. And so how will the functions change? So AI augmentation will allow the procedure to be performed by staff who don't require lengthy training, different types of training. And running hugely all the way through this actually is the need to be making really good use of data. And therefore, bioinformaticians emerging as one of the examples of professions that we can see expanding. So again, the document is brought to life with some examples of personas. Actually, we looked at them at 2009, 2019. So where have they come from? What's their early experience of where did they develop their interest in this role, maybe while they were still at school? What kind of experience have they had of learning using tech? 2019, where are they now in their educational career journey? And what's their day-to-day experience of using tech? And then in 10 years, where will they be? And so we've got 4 of those, nurse, doctor, paramedic, bioinformatician. And subsequently, we've done work, for example, with pharmacists. We've now got Owen, the pharmacist. And right now I'm doing some work with thanks to some of the clinical librarians in the country involved in the International Clinical Librarian Conference, and we're developing a persona for clinical librarians. So maybe there are others we could develop. People on this call might be interested in others. And I think it helps to really focus the thinking and to bring the document alive, and that was its purpose as a persona. Thank you, Catherine. So let me come to the recommendations. There were 43 in all. Absolutely not going to go through them all, but you will want to make sure that your colleagues in healthcare settings are familiar with them, or those who are teaching people in healthcare settings, or those who are devising public health strategies for those in the community. So whichever sector you're listening from, I do invite you to scan the horizons. They're actually beautifully set out for you at the beginning of the report. So, but as I say, I think it's a good read. But I'll go through the ones that I think are particularly relevant for information professionals, and encourage you to go through this slide set again, and to as well as looking at the report, and to be thinking about them. So underpinning, the board itself made recommendations about citizens and the patient, educating and engaging the public around these technologies, working with patient and carer organisations, working through other agencies in communities, and the digital medicine panel also flagged the importance of our online content being a vital, trusted source of health information and resourced appropriately. So all areas where we may be working in partnership with information providers in the community, or regional, local level, and the importance of this national resource, which some listeners might be involved with. Thank you. All of the work around investing in recommendations there are recommendations around investing in the current workforce and some around investing in the future workforce. And here I've summarised from all of them those which I think, touch to our work. So the development of specialist digital skills, that's important for us, and in the way that we model working with people who use our services too, I believe. Lifelong training, of course, our role in navigating people to sources of continuous professional development, new educational opportunities. Educational resources need to be developed to educate and train all healthcare professionals in health data, ethics, critical appraisal and interpretation of AI and robotics. And as we're taking this work forward, we're really pushing that it's not just sort of digital skills include, as well as the technical, practical skills and the analysis and the technicalities behind it, there's also that piece about navigation and critical assessment of resources that you're using. And for us, that will include, over years, we've been skilled in identifying the bias in publications. I guess that means that, there's going to be a percentage of people on this going to need to be thinking about how they detect bias in an AI algorithm that's being used to support a systematic review and a literature search. So whole new fields opening up before us, as well as for clinicians. Healthcare professionals are clearly going to need training resources and educational programs. There are real issues, of course, around regulation, cybersecurity, data privacy, data anonymisation, and lots of opportunities to learn from international healthcare systems. And you'll see there's a little code behind each of these. So DM is digital medicine, G is the genomics panel, AI and robotics is the artificial intelligence and robotics panel, OD, organisational development. So each panel made its own recommendations, ones from, and some of these are doubled up because they're so similar and people, so this gives a really good spread of thinking across the piece and a very comprehensive view of what needs to be done. Thank you, Catherine. So there's the education and development of the whole workforce, and we talk about a new digital education programme being needed, and the E comes from the recommendations from the educationalists who worked cross-sectorally across all panels. The importance of employers ensuring that there is support for staff built in at the beginning, built in into training, career pathways, placements, induction, I might add. Professional, statutory and regulatory bodies and practitioners need to identify the knowledge, skills, professional attributes and behaviours needed for healthcare graduates to work in a technologically enabled service, and then work on that redesign. This applies equally to us around the knowledge and skills base for library and knowledge specialists, information professionals, knowledge managers, across sector actually, but certainly coming into the health service and working with higher education, and we are already doing that. And organisations are going to be needing to ensure that current and new staff are supported to reach an appropriate level of digital literacy for their career stage. And a little bit later I'll come on to some of the things that are in hand to help develop tools to support that. Thank you, Catherine. So I paused there partly to drink a cup of tea and partly so that you would have a chance to look at this slide. A really explicit recommendation repeated in two panels, both by digital medicine and by the artificial intelligence and robotics panel, that more staff are needed with particular types of skills, and the NHS should create or increase the numbers of clinician, scientist, technologist and knowledge specialist posts, and talk then around dedicated accredited time to carry on their learning opportunities, whether that's to partner and work with academia and or in the health tech industry on design to take forward these technologies. So there was a real sense that new roles are needed, and that there would be the partnership working through a whole range of collaborations would be important to that. And this is an important set of, this is a really important recommendation for us, and it is one on which Health Education England has taken forward with some recommendations to organisations around staff ratios. As I speak, they're just about to be announced, and we'll get some information out to you about that. Thank you. So the panels were all asked to talk about recommendations at the citizen and patient level, at the level of the system, and at the level of healthcare professionals. And as I say, you're not seeing all the recommendations in this presentation. If we go on to talk about the ones that are particular in terms of organisational development, first up, there was a need to see board level responsibility in this area for the effect in this area. It's explicitly realised that NHS boards need to take responsibility for the knowledge management. They need to enable their staff to learn from experience, both successes and failures. And there's a huge contribution that we can make around this, partly, of course, about sharing the knowledge base, the evidence base, partly around helping people keep up to date, but also about helping people use tried and trusted tools and techniques to share their learning before, during and after interventions. So great opportunities for knowledge specialists to make a real contribution here and be part of a wider process of strengthening systems to disseminate lessons from early adoption and sharing examples. So all part of that day-to-day contribution that library and knowledge services make to an open and inclusive innovation culture, and really prioritising inquiries all the way through. Thank you. So as the commitment going forward, coming through the report, that there was a passion around needing to support the work is enabled by the latest technology and that people can access insights from real-world data, that our leaders need to create a culture in which digitally supported care becomes the norm, where interventions are evaluated using real-world data and evidence. We know that the service will need to attract the best technologists, informaticians and data scientists. And to be really clear, I am absolutely committed to making the NHS a destination employer for library and knowledge specialists. I think that's absolutely essential. We need to grow this workforce and we need to be building it with people with a passion and an appetite for providing whatever technologies are available. And there is always this debate, and it applies to us as much to anyone else, a balance between the generic and the more specialist capabilities. You know, I gave that exciting example of needing to understand the bias in algorithms, and I absolutely 100% believe that we'll need people who can do that. We will always need people with great customer care skills and people who can synthesize and summarize evidence for busy healthcare professionals. So we need people who can manage our resource discovery and people who can help other information professionals be really skilled in supporting citizens and the public. So a huge range of work to cover. And so in planning our education and development, there is a fine balance around the generic and the more specialist capabilities, which I think we all need to think about. Thank you. If you're taking back thoughts for your organisation, a healthcare organisation to consider, or organisations that work with healthcare or support the education. I think probably these are the three questions. So is your board aware of the potential that digital technology has to transform services will be provided? Can we help in your organisation? How far in your organisation can you create a movement of clinicians who work using technology alongside technical skills? And then this really significant piece that actually when we wrote the report, the research was suggesting that 90% of all jobs in the economy would be requiring some digital component over the next 5 years. By the time I came this summer to be presenting 6 months after the publication of the review, new data was suggesting that 95% of all jobs are going to require some digital skills. So how do we ensure that everyone who works in health and care has the appropriate awareness so that those technological changes can truly be embraced and embedded by all of us in the future? That's got implications for our own workforce, but actually what's our role in that into the wider workforce? Before I go on to talk about
Sorry, Sue, we seem to have lost you. Sue, are you still there? I think you're coming back.
Catherine, can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you now.
Will you be able to edit that?
Now.
So there is a really key underpinning point to make here, because I can just picture the yet we know it's unbelievably frustrating to use some of this tech, some of our current tech, some of our connectivity in some of our settings at the present. And I can assure you from the conversations that I was part of that that the I'm recording, Mark. Can you pause it and we'll go?
Go.
Of course, as you approach your organisations, this report was well aware of the frustrations involved in day-to-day connectivity in some of our healthcare settings. And so the whole of the report is presaged on the recommendations of the WACHTER report, that's WACHTER, that you might want to look at. And these look towards the work of ensuring connectivity is in place by 2021 is the date there. You might picture with me my fingers crossed behind my back in terms of another 12 months, maybe a little bit longer. What I can say is, having had the privilege of meeting some of our really senior stakeholders in this field, some of the senior leaders around implementation of change around the infrastructure, that there is an absolute commitment to making that progress, and I do believe we're going to see it. So in a sense, that gives us a window of opportunity in which to gear ourselves up and get the skills we need to take this forward when the connectivity is properly in place and the interoperability is properly in place. And so I suggest we treat that delay not as a reason for saying, well, we'll wait and get ourselves ready when it's here. I think it's a window in which we can learn. So, a real opportunity, in fact. So let's go on to think about our role in developing a digitally capable workforce using that window of opportunity. And there are some key points about education, if you'd like to move on, Catherine, that we can pick up, and I'll get you to bring them in one at a time. So we've got 1.4 million staff in the NHS. You're going to see that change percentage come up next, because the report talks about 90% and subsequent data analysis talks about 95%. We are developing a programme of digital education now. if you'd like to bring that one in, Catherine, it's Building the Digital Ready Workforce is a major programme within Health Education England. And within that, there are a whole range of tools and resources being developed. And we see new professional roles. I'll invite you to bring that in, please, Catherine. And within that, we see changes in what people are looking for from their education. Educational provision that's appropriately personalised is the next point, please. Based on a comprehensive learner profile, Health Education England, if you'd like to take the next point in, is building a learning hub, which will be announced very shortly. And these comprehensive learner profiles are going to be a really important way so that we can have personalised education provision for people. And that in itself, on the next point, will enable and support returners. And we in our services are going to need to find time. We're going to need to offer time for staff to learn and train, and certainly for NHS Library and Knowledge Specialists in the recent Development Needs Survey, the emerging technologies and familiarity with that is high up the list, and we will be responding to that in the range of educational opportunities offered. If you'd like to go on to the next point. And then the last point, which is always made by Trudy Roberts, is that fun needs to be that learning needs to be fun, exciting, and we really want it to be addictive. We want people to get into the habit of learning. So look forward to having new opportunities there. And Health Education England's technology enhanced learning offer will be an important piece of this. And obviously going forward, personalised education may well be via methods that are using artificial intelligence and machine learning to help us take that forward. And part of our job is to think about, as we skill up the workforce, the wider healthcare workforce, is to think about how can we make it easier for teams to learn together. If you could go on, please, Catherine. So digital literacy is really important. I've mentioned that already. When we talk about digital literacy, that awareness, access to training and support, new career opportunities for some of that workforce, and that may well include library and knowledge specialists who develop skills in these areas. Thank you. Digital skills, as I've already talked about, we've got the technical skills, obviously, to use digital technologies. Actually, I'd add behind that to develop the technologies. But these digital navigation skills, the wider set of skills needed to succeed, to function in a digital world, include finding information, prioritising information, assessing its quality and reliability of information. Absolutely our business as a group of library and knowledge specialists getting involved and playing our part in this agenda. I'd like to go on, please. I'm going to invite you to look this up. You've got the link here. We're talking here about digital literacy and the areas and components involved. Working with CILIT will be supporting the update of the professional knowledge and skills base, and we'll be looking with others at digital tools by which you can assess your skills. We're piloting some work in Health Education England, and I've already volunteered that library and knowledge specialists in our sector might well be very willing to be part of a pilot of any new tools. And JISC already has tools of that kind in place. Thank you. So what's our role then in developing information health and digitally literate citizens? And I guess this is where I'm hoping that you will go on to be talking about this as we go on. Some of this is very familiar content for you. You'll know about the levels of literacy and illiteracy, and we really need to think about where our role is. So if we're thinking that our target is that, likely we're looking at 90% of the adult population being able to gain these skills, how are we going to help them all realise the benefits of this? And there's a big chunk of work to be done there. Next slide. We need people to be able to benefit from the digital age And again, we need to think about what's our role, how we can contribute. Thank you. Health literacy is the challenge. You'll be familiar with this data. 42% of working age adults are unable to understand or make use of everyday health information. So you've got the challenges around digital skills. You've then got the challenge around health literacy, into which we are not making great inroads, guys. And this has to be an area where library knowledge specialists can assist and contribute. And it may be that what we're doing in our field in the health sector is really supporting partners who have ready face-to-face contact or direct interaction with the wider public and help them to develop. So there's a huge potential for us to make a big difference to health and health literacy as we go forward. Thank you. We are doing great work in this area. This is work that Ruth Carlisle, one of the senior team in Health Education England, is leading. You'll be finding out more about this over the year ahead, but a whole series of tools that go from a 15-minute induction session, 35-minute e-learning, raising the awareness of health and social care staff that health literacy is an issue for people, and that goes right through to a day's training program in key tools and techniques, through to a train the trainer face-to-face day. So watch out for this space and do get involved and take those opportunities as they come through. So we've talked about our role in helping the workforce. What about our own services? How are they can change, and how are we going to reimagine those? If you'd like to move on, please, Catherine. So much of this, I think, will be about extending the reach of the work we already do, but it's crucial that we anticipate changes in user needs and preferences. Some of that's about generational change, some of that's about behaviours, some of that's about the technology that people are familiar and comfortable to use. What will these things mean for the design and delivery of health knowledge services going forward? What does technological change mean for the information products that deliver knowledge for healthcare? There will be fundamental changes, if you'd like to move on, please, in aspects of ways of working. So already work underway and completed around machine learning for identifying randomised controlled trials. Within Health Education England, we're doing some work around using some pilot research work around using AI-enabled products to improve resource discovery, and that work will be kicking off this year. So we're taking the learning of this now while we can, and then looking at what that will mean. And there's obviously various examples about how you can harness AI to help people formulate searches. The example of robot analysis text mining, which is work that's been done by NICE and Cochrane with academic partners to sift evidence, is a really good example. Excuse me. Catherine. So as we take forward knowledge services, some of the knowledge products, some of the ways, of course, be able to improve and advance by adopting approaches like artificial intelligence. We got the example of the NICE Cochrane work using robot analyst text mining. That's a piece of work that's already well written up, as I've said. How else are we going to use it? So we can use AI and machine learning to help people formulate questions and to conduct literature searches, as well as to conduct literature searches. How are we going to build the technical infrastructure so that collections are accessible by APIs and can be used by machine learning algorithms? How will we apply this to teaching information skills, information literacy? What about our workflows, analysing library tasks? And of course, there's going to be a broader piece of raising awareness around the impact of AI on people's lives and data management and governance and protection too. So lots and lots of different ways. These will be fundamental changes in the production of material and so on. And yet the importance of the interface of somebody really understanding your inquiry and a whole range of expanded opportunities to get involved in disseminating knowledge and getting evidence to a much broader range of people are just unbelievably exciting. It's a very exciting time. So let's go on to think about how will we as librarians and information professionals prepare, and maybe go for the question that might be in your mind by now. So will a robot take our jobs? So this is a piece that you'll find up on the BBC. And they say it's too close to call. At work, will you need to negotiate? Do you help and assist others? Do you come up with original ideas? I think the answer is there's plenty of room for you in this environment. And I believe that our work will expand and that we will need more knowledge specialists. And I think the report of the Topol report echoes that based on the experience and observation of this panel of experts. These are their recommendations, not mine to them. And I do strongly believe that in our field, as in some others, it will become ever more important to have our interface to the system. So let's think about reimagining these roles and the questions we might ask ourselves then on the next slide. So that broad piece that relates to everyone, how do we ensure that our staff, that we as individuals have the awareness and skills to enable our service to embrace technological change? How confident are we of the digital capabilities that we have now? And I've talked about our tools that might be coming in that we can pilot to help us with that. How will we build the digital capabilities of our specialist workforce? And certainly there's a lot of inquiry going on around that. I'm talking to people in the School of Science at Health Education England, looking at some of the modules that they know are being developed in some of the universities for clinicians that I believe would be equally relevant to knowledge specialists, perhaps to clinical librarians too. How are we going to build these digital capabilities? How do we redesign our workforce? We already know that we're seeing an expansion of embedded roles, whether that's clinical librarians, outreach librarians. We've got roles being piloted as embedded in academic health science networks, embedded roles in research teams, embedded role in quality improvement teams. This is a period in which a whole range of other disciplines are understanding how important it is to bring our skills to bear as part of their ongoing work and development. So 10 years' time, what will the roles of health librarians, information professionals and knowledge managers be like in 2029? How do we build our talent pipeline? And what are we doing now to prepare? And these are the questions we need to take forward. As we do that, if you'd like to go on to the next slide, the purpose and our vision remains exactly the same. NHS bodies, their staff, learners, patients and the public use the right knowledge and evidence at the right time in the right place, enabling high quality decision making, learning, research and innovation to achieve excellent healthcare and health improvement. And this so totally chimes with the recommendations that you've heard coming through from the Topol review. Thank you. So my belief is that as we think about those questions as individuals, as library teams, we think about them as we go into next stages of planning of continuing professional development, as we talk to educators, I think it's key that we understand that health professionals need to focus on priorities and place, that we need to be making sure that we are meeting those and reaching out, working as virtual teams across boundaries, working with other professionals, data information specialists alongside us. We need to really recognise that it takes time to become a specialist, and celebrate that and make sure that those who employ us understand it. And of course, we always need, as ever, to demonstrate impact and make the case. If you could go on, please, Catherine. I think I've already started to emphasise that I see this shift from providing research and discovery, this trend towards an increasingly embedded roles and a trend towards decision-ready information that we already see, getting materials summarised and synthesised to the level that is for the teams with which we're working. And I show this particular slide because it amplifies that message from across a whole range of corporate settings and just shows the context in which we as health professionals work as we convey information. Thank you. So from that, I think in our sector, we will see roles enlarged and enhanced. That's the way I see this going as we drive and deliver that vision of knowledge for healthcare in our technologically enabled health service. Thank you. The CILIP response was that CILIP will engage with Health Education England to progress 3 linked programmes. So there's a piece around looking at CILIP's workforce strategy. There's a piece around working with Health Libraries Group around the continuing professional development and opportunities to support specialist skills development. And then this piece which looks at a CILIP-led review of the impact of artificial intelligence, machine learning and robotics on our workforce, drawing on the insights of the Topol review and looking at what the implications are therefore for the education and development of our workforce. I'm thrilled that that piece of work will be kicking off formally in April. The background work is starting. It will be CILIP-led. HEE is supporting that in a couple of ways, and not least in allowing me to chair it. So that work will carry on through 2020, beginning of 2021, and we hope that will be the end. Hope is not a strategy. I'd like to not use the word hope. The absolute aim is that that will be a piece that will inform further thinking around these questions around what do we need to do and supporting and engaging educators, trainers and so on in setting the direction and providing the resources that the profession needs to move ahead. So in the immediate, there's an opportunity to keep up to date. There are weekly technology updates, weekly ones around the Topol review that you can request to see. There's also this monthly update, which looks at the evidence and news that's emerging around technologies in library settings, and the addresses are there. You can write to that email address, knowledgemanagement@he.nhs.uk, to sign up for either of those bulletins. Okay, and at that point, I am going to pause and take a couple of questions before this to a close. Catherine.
Okay, so one of the questions was about the security of library jobs, which you've already partially answered in your presentation. But that was sort of, with the skills that we need, what happens with some of our workforce? Some of our workforce are very comfortable with technology and are really looking forward to sort of all the new bits and pieces coming in and what we can make use of. Others are, let's say, a little bit more reserved about it and have some reservations. So what can we say to them? How do we help bring their skills up? How do we make them comfortable?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And part of it is helping people make a bridge between their lives and their professional lives, or between their learning experiences and behaviours and their professional working lives. So if I just pull apart a couple of those things, we didn't have major training programs to learn how to get cash out of an ATM machine. But there are sufficient advantages to us doing it that actually people overcame their natural reticence to doing that. Standing in public daylight, taking money out, keying in numbers. It sounds terribly strange, foreign and threatening as you describe it like that. If you describe it as, I can do something I need to do faster, securely, and at my convenience in as I want to do it, suddenly that changes. And I think the same needs to apply to work, that there's a piece about workforce design and how we do our work, making it much easier. So implicit benefits in the way that we redesign process and think about processes is one way that we can help with that. Another way, I think, is that was very curious as we did the study. We found that, and I saw in my own home actually, one of my son's girlfriend was doing her first degree, and her mother was a returner doing a degree in nursing, and they would sit on my settee with more devices than I could count, using Snap, Fluffle and Facebook and all the rest of it, sending messages from one device to another, and he totally confidently, quite slick. And then when I asked them to apply the same digital skills to their studies, just were not transferring it. So there is some kind of piece there by which I think we have to make it more comfortable and allow people to use a wider range of things that they that they use in other settings. And I think it's only convention that we don't allow some of that in terms of producing library materials or producing materials that are going to engage with our customer base. And so maybe there are some things just about ways of working. I do also think, though, that there needs to be a quite systematic approach. We'll be piloting a piece around helping people baseline where their skills are, and then thinking about across several domains of digital skills, which ones are relevant for them, which one will help them. I confess that I have only very recently learned how to export the tiles and images from PowerPoint into a really helpful format when I'm doing presentations. That's been there for 20 years. I just didn't get to doing it. And so there's something about as well being much more encouraging staff teams to talk about what they use and how they do stuff. Actually, absolutely the basics. So a structured approach, an approach that responds to the data, the development needs analysis that we've just done, and putting CPD programs in place are the things that we'll do from the centre. But I think within teams, there is something about really making sure that people engage with those baseline skills analysis. Managers helping people in staff discussions and in appraisals to really assess what would be helpful, helping people see where delivery of the service might go, and really thinking about the redesign and thinking about harnessing the range of communications technologies, at least, that we already have. Does that help, Catherine?
It does, yes, thank you. I'm just keeping an eye on the time, and I've realised we've unfortunately run out of time for further questions. But what we were going to suggest at this point for any of our viewers, if you've got any further questions, email them in, and we'll make sure that my email address is up in a second. And we'll put it to Sue, and she can answer any questions that you've got in a blog post on the Knowledge for Healthcare website. So we'll put more information up with that when we circulate this recording. It only goes for me to say, Sue, thank you very, very much. That's been an absolutely fascinating tour of the Topol review. And what really speaks to me is this balance between our generic and what we currently do, and then expanding specialist roles. So there's just going to be more and more career opportunities for people to get involved in all sorts of things. And I think that's only to the good for our profession. So thank you very much, and we look forward to any questions that we're going to hear from you. Thank you. Bye-bye.